Hello everyone and good evening. It is great to see everybody. If you want to be part of the collaboration, it is
best to be in Twitch chat because we are going to
build a campaign from the ground up. We're going to literally start from zero and work our way all the way up to a Children of Midnight
Coven
campaign that you could run with your friends. You will probably hear some errant noises in the background. Anya is playing Animal Crossing. They might chime in. We are going to hit a wide range of skill levels. We're going to be talking about Children of
Midnight, Coven a good bit, but a lot of these tips are applicable to any game.
Let's start with a glossary of terms. We've got player character. A player character is a character that is primarily played by a player. They are the protagonists of their story. They have defined stats and abilities. In Children of Midnight Coven, we call their playbook a grimoire. It's also their character sheet. Pretty much every game has a character sheet. A non-player character, also known as an NPC, is a character portrayed by the game master and does not usually need to or have defined stats and abilities like a PC. They absolutely can. It can sometimes be very useful to have some of their abilities thought out in advance, but usually a name, a profession, and a couple of personality quirks can get you a pretty long way into running an NPC. A GM, or Game Master, is the facilitator of a game and an arbiter of the rules and rulings. Some games call them a keeper, a dungeon master, a storyteller, and there are many, many, many others. Some very, very interesting ones. But the GM does not usually play a player character. However, they do take on the roles of other secondary characters over the course of the game. We're also going to talk very specifically about Forged in the Dark games. These are games that are based off of Blades in the Dark by John Harper. The primary or core concepts are simple dice rolling mechanics and narrative gameplay. Oftentimes the players get to take narration away from the game master, either in a formal way because of what they rolled on their dice, or in an informal way. Also, the player character group is almost its own character. Player characters can come and go from within a group in a Forged in the Dark game, and the game shouldn't generally suffer because the core character is the group itself. And then, lastly, a Forged in the Dark term called a faction. A faction is any organized group of NPCs that has its own stated goals. It can be allied, neutral, or even adversarial to the player characters. So, that gets us through a couple of those terms. Does anyone have any questions at this point? I would be very happy to answer any questions. Feel free to shout them out in chat if you do, and I'll pick those up as they come. We're going to assume that we're literally starting from zero. You don't have any players selected, you don't have a storyline planned. All you have is
the free Children of
Midnight
Coven quick
start booklet
in the description below.
We're going to assume that you haven't necessarily run any Forged in the Dark games before. If you have nothing else, consume as much media as you can that would be relevant to the game that you want to run. So, in our case, we're going to go over the touchstones, the pieces of media that made us want to create Children of Midnight Coven. Encourage your potential players to do that as well. This will put you all on the same page, more or less, as far as the types of stories that you want to tell. In the case of Fuck Around and Find Out, which was based on the Loki series, make everybody watch, I think it was episode 8 of the Loki series. You're probably all on the same page. So, with Children of Midnight, we're going to go through the touchstones, and we're going to actually pick some of those touchstones here and we're going to build that campaign based on that. So find your touchstones. Almost any role-playing game book that you grab is going to have a list of media that they think is fundamental to understanding the game. In the case of like Vampire the Masquerade, that probably includes such things as listening to some Joy Division and reading some Anne Rice novels. Yeah, most games are going to have a list of media. So make sure you've actually given some consideration to that media. If you have a really strong idea of what you want to run, the game seems suitable, you might be okay to skip this, but that's kind of an advanced move. I would say for your first game, consume relevant media. It's pretty fundamental. The other thing this does for you is it gives you a common language with your potential players. If you've consumed the same media, then you're going to be able to talk about the type of story you want to run without having to go to great lengths to describe things to them that were a part of that media. This will give you great ideas for your games and give you some ideas about the situations that you could put PCs in or that PCs find themselves in. Next, if you can, read the game material and do your best to internalize it. By internalize it, what I mean is understand it moderately well and then start to apply it to media. So I watch a relevant piece of media and put the movie or TV show into game terms for myself. Oh, they're doing a flashback here. Oh, okay, I see what they did here. That is the consequence of that action, even though they happened several minutes apart. You can start to see the reason why they created the tools for you in the book. This can also destroy game systems. It's how I stopped ever wanting to run anything Dungeons and Dragons related. This was after years of trying to turn everything I watched into a D&D session. I watched Neil Gaiman's story called Neverwhere. There's a part of the series where a character who's just been resurrected, extremely weakened by the process, and he's standing with a crossbow pointed at the neck of the greatest hunter who's ever lived. She's in perfectly good health, and he's nearly dead standing next to her. But she's at the top of a never-ending staircase. And she says, "I can't believe you're threatening me because of the state you're in." And he says, "This crossbow bolt to your throat," and the fall of several hundred meters
might prove
otherwise. And my brain did the calculation of what would happen if that happened in one of my games. She'd hit the bottom and still probably have 120 health. That was it for me. That completely destroyed my ability to run Dungeons and Dragons. It just stopped making any kind of sense to me. I realized that I liked cinematic scenes, and if a person could fall to terminal velocity and then get up and brush themselves off and walk away, that wasn't a game that I wanted to be running or playing. But to each their own. Something that I like to do, and this is definitely optional, and sometimes it's not possible, watch other GMs run the game. Whether that's on an actual play or maybe listening to a podcast about a game, you can learn a lot about the game from watching or listening. You will not learn everything. Isabella says, "The storyteller has the power and encouragement to change the rules if they so desire. World of Darkness has that written into their books." Almost every game has the rule of cool, which sort of gives the game master the power to change the rules
necessary for the enjoyment of the players.
I
disagree with that, but not
for the reasons that most people would assume. I love that players and game masters make a contract with one another when they decide to play a game together. We have codified that contract into a session 0, which is something we're going to talk about in a future lesson. If that contract includes the rule of cool, and the players trust their storyteller because you've given them a good reason to trust you, then I think the rule of cool is fantastic. However, I think it does get misused by a lot of people, especially in combat-heavy or stat-heavy games. It's used as a way of shutting down player dissent, which can be problematic.
It's a symptom that shows
that everybody isn't necessarily on the same page, but that's for another day. I do think it's an important conversation, and I do think the rule of cool is very important. In Forged in the Dark games, the rule of cool is far less necessary because the game makes narrative choices and narrative play fun, interesting, and with the rules. The rules don't fight against your ability to narrate something creatively and interestingly. So when you're watching another GM, game master, a game, try not to worry about making sure that you are doing it the way that they run it, and don't worry about whether you're copying storylines. Role-playing games aren't like other media. If you copy another GM's storyline, the story police aren't going to come after you. Another thing to consider, you especially with some of the extremely polished pieces of game media, as Isabella says, comparing your behind the scenes with their highlight reels while you're watching another person GM. Watch how they use the game's rules, how they make rulings, the way they describe the setting. The last thing I wanted to touch on is, as you come up with storyline ideas, write them down, get them on paper. You have prophetic dreams about how you want to run a game, write it down, because those things can vanish out of your brain so fast. In the case of Forged in the Dark games, don't worry about giving away your plot. If you come up with a 2 or 3 line idea for a story, and you have an idea of maybe where it might start and where it might end, don't worry about showing that to players. This applies even more so if you are new to GMing, and if your players are new. Don't hide anything. There are some games that thrive on mystery, but in a Forged in the Dark game, your players can decide not to know something in the game and make that an interesting part of their character. Let that be something that each player decides, rather than being your choice alone. In the exact same vein, be open to altering your ideas to better suit the players, whether it's something they want in a game, something that they don't want to see in a game. We're going to come back to this when we talk about session zeros and player consent. I think that gives us enough of a starting point that we're going to put all of these things into action, and we're going to build up to what you need to be ready for session 0. The actual thing that got me into Forged in the Dark games was watching an actual play called Scum and Villainy Star Dancer. If Children of Midnight...
Coven is the child of the chilling adventures of Sabrina and a discovery of witches.
Then Scum and Villainy is
the child of
Star Wars and Firefly. It's this massive space opera, but it's exactly what the players want it to be, set
in that world.
The Magpies are a Blades in the Dark podcast. They are very be gay, do crimes, girl power, and it's magnificent. Okay, so the touchstones that we have here include some tabletop role-playing games, TV shows, books, music, movies, podcasts, YouTube channels, and things like that. So what I would like us to do is to pick 2 to 4 of these touchstones to make the sort of common language that we're going to use to build a campaign. We're going to be really flexible based on player feedback. If we could pick 2 to 4 things that a lot of us have seen, maybe the others can go and check out, that we can make the basis of a Children of Midnight campaign. You can go as wild as you want, and I promise you, Children of Midnight can stretch to accommodate almost any touchstone, but definitely anything on these lists. The Grimm fairy tales, I love that as a starting idea. We can maybe layer some other things on top of that. Penny Dreadful, yeah. Anita Blake, with me not knowing a lot about it, probably not the best idea for me to pick that up. I think regardless, we're going to have elements that are Anita Blake because we're covering so much of the same ground. Buffy is a great piece of media. Most people are aware of it. A formative piece of media, especially great for new players. We're going to look at the elements of these things and sort of pick apart what it is that we really like about them. There's a lot that you can get out of things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer. What do we see as being a foundational thing that we want to bring across from Buffy? Is it the hunting of creatures, the studying, the Scooby Gang aspect, problem solving? We want to figure out like what draws us to that and what parts of it we want to see. Identifying threats, solving mysteries, and kicking ass. Do we want to see martial arts? The monsters to friends trope. Yeah. Alright. So, with the multiverse, I do think that we have a way we could pull that in, and that is the Astral Plane.
Mm-hmm.
In the books glossary, up here, we have an entry for the Astral. Realm somehow attached to the minds of sentient creatures. Spirits residing in the astral are embodiments of concepts and emotions. You could have an overactive astral plane that is basically spawning realities. That could be a really interesting storyline. Ooh, I like that. Yeah. So when we look at the factions, and we're talking about the astral, let's see, I feel like Ascendium. A group of astral-obsessed witches trying to leave the physical world.
Maybe they...
Yeah. So, ooh, okay, yeah. Everybody's already blending all this together in a really good way. So we can have astral monsters. They can literally be imaginary or imagined monsters. Monsters from stories that no one's ever had to face before, that because the astral realm is so overactive, because of something Ascendium has been doing, we have all these, like, bubble realities.
Oh, we could do it like a Terry Pratchett thing. And, like, children's nightmare life and all kinds of problems.
I've got goosebumps. Imagine you're just chilling and Rumpelstiltskin pops in to ruin your life. Yeah, you could absolutely do that. Okay, that sounds amazing. Maybe it's not even on purpose. They could have been just channeling all this energy into astral portals.
And they ripped the butthole open.
Yeah, ripped the universe a new butthole, and this stuff's happening. Heck, if the player characters even wanted to, they could work for Ascendium. They could be sent out on missions to close rifts using an Ascendium artifact. And another twist to that could be that the artifact has side effects.
You open a butthole and
Order gets really pissed off and it's like, we're gonna revoke your
says, if you don't fix your fuck up, you'll be thrown in prison.
Mm-hmm. SCPs. Oh yeah, absolutely.
Ooh, I love it.
Now we have potentially an arc. We start with these imagined and imaginary creatures and fairy tale creatures. You're sealing away all these things that you think are so big and bad, Rumpelstiltskin ruining people's lives and stuff, but you're making room for all these SCPs that are now the new imagined thing. Yeah.
I feel like me and Gavin, at this point, I'd be like, I have an idea. And so I would grab my notebook and I would write down a few story points that I would want to see happen as a storyteller. And then for every session, I normally have a checklist of things that I want the players to see so I can stay on track, because I need a lot of help to stay on track. So I have to have lists for everything. This is helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
And if you don't get to all the stuff on your list, or you skip over something, or the players just don't go somewhere yet, it's not a big deal. But it just helps me to keep a flow. Like when there is a lull, I'm able to be like, "Ooh, next thing on the list, let's go."
Yeah. Yep. Awesome. It really puts a spin on us as people using the power of imagination to manifest things into existence. Oh yeah, that's another potential season ender of a storyline, struggle princess.
We could have a congregation that is using
their witchcraft to create something and cause it to manifest, possibly something that didn't exist before, because they realized the power in it. Yeah, maybe you have
a new grimoire of
witches, reality benders based
on a new
understanding
of the astral plane
in a way that other witches haven't. You could even extend that power to player characters. So, like Anya said, I'd be writing down all of these ideas, and I would say, okay, I have a strong enough idea. I think I could get a gaming group excited about this. So go on Discord, then write up a few paragraphs and put it in the looking for a group channel, and see if I could get anybody else half as excited as I am. Give some other people goosebumps talking about some game ideas. And there are parts of this that some players might say, oh, leave out the Cthulhu and fishnets. And then there are going to be other people that say, oh, well, can we do all this, but can we also do vampires, And you're going to work with those players. That's when you're going to have your session 0. Once you have some enthusiastic players, if there's a glossary, read it, almost memorize it. Try to use the terms in ways that are appropriate so you can feel like you really understand it. We tried to put every term that's important to the game into this half of a page, so that once you read and understand this, you have already learned the vast majority of the game's lore by reading the glossary. We get down here to the actual rules and what it means to have willpower and how you can use it. These are extremely important. Foundational. How to make an action roll. The absolute basis of the game. If there's literally one thing aside from the glossary, it's how to make an action roll. Every other part of a Forged in the Dark game is a variation on making an action roll. You want to make a resistance roll, you're basically making an action roll. You want to make a fortune roll, you're making an action roll. This section, Detailed Actions, tells you exactly how you can use every action, and tells you when it might be better to use a different action. Teamwork is necessary. That's one page. I think we've got about, 6 pages of stuff that's like must read, and everything else is, sort of optional. So, for homework. If you have some time during the next week, I would recommend at least reading a portion of the Quick Start Guide and watch a piece of media and see if you can pick out a specific
Xylovan action's consequences.
If you're watching a character fire their blaster and try to use it to distract someone, and then you see the results of that, and you should be able to look at that and say, okay, based on what happened because of that action, I think that they probably rolled a 4 or 5. So I think next time I'm going to have a pitch written up based on the stuff we talked about. We'll talk about it on the Discord, and then we'll move forward as if we were doing a session 0. Or, my hope would be for us to find players and maybe eventually do a session in this game world that we're creating. So, if you are interested in that, make sure you join the Discord. Patreon supporters will be given priority if we are running low on slots.
But this will be open to everybody.
In the Discord who is interested in playing, I will bid you all a fond farewell, and I will speak to you on Discord. And we will see you on Friday for Anya Plays Animal Crossing. Have a great night, y'all.